The gun wasn't supposed to fire, the sewers were real. And the director, he got replaced mid-shoot while the cameras kept rolling. He Walked by Night wasn't just a noir thriller. It was a documentary disguised as fiction, shot in darkness so thick the actors couldn't see their marks. These are 20 weird facts about He Walked by Night. And the bonus, the film created an entire TV genre by accident. Load the camera. This investigation runs deep. Number 1. Most crime films start with imagination. He Walked by Night started with a murder that shook Los Angeles to its core. In 1946, a brilliant electronics technician named Irwin Walker shot LAPD officer Colin Campbell during a routine traffic stop. Walker wasn't just a criminal. He was a genius, a former military radar specialist who turned his technical skills into a one-man crime wave. He burglarized electronic stores, modified police radios to monitor law enforcement, and lived in complete isolation, moving through the city like a ghost. The LAPD launched one of the biggest manhunts in the department's history, tracking him through the storm drains beneath Los Angeles. When they finally cornered him in the tunnels, it took multiple officers and a hail of bullets to bring him down. Within months, producer Brian Foy saw the story and knew it had to become a film. Not glamorized, not Hollywoodized, just raw, procedural, and real. He Walked by Night wasn't inspired by a true story. It was ripped straight from police files, with detectives consulting on set to make sure every detail matched what actually happened. The result was a film that didn't just entertain. It documented a moment when Los Angeles realized its criminals could be smarter than anyone expected. Number 2. Jack Webb was supposed to be a supporting player, a technical advisor with a few lines, maybe a scene or two. He showed up to set as Sergeant Joe Friday, or not yet, just a lab technician named Lee. But something happened during filming that changed everything. Webb became obsessed. He watched the real LAPD detectives working on set, studied how they talked, how they moved, how they processed evidence with cold, methodical precision. He saw the way they stripped emotion out of their voices when discussing crimes, the way they focused on facts, procedures, times, locations. Most actors would have ignored this and played the role for drama. Webb did the opposite. He absorbed every detail, every cadence, every dead-eyed stare at a piece of evidence. Between takes, he'd corner the technical advisors and ask questions. How do you label evidence? What's the chain of custody? How do you write a report? The crew thought he was weird. Director Alfred Worker thought he was wasting time. But Webb kept digging, kept learning, kept filing away every procedural detail. And then, 3 years later, he created Dragnet, the most influential police procedural in television history. The entire show, the flat dialogue, the just the facts narration, the focus on procedure over personality, it all came from this one film. He Walked by Night didn't just give Webb a role, it gave him a religion, and he preached it for the rest of his career.
What did you say? I'm saying he worked here.
Number 3. Alfred Worker was a studio veteran, a competent craftsman who directed dozens of B-movies without incident. But halfway through, He Walked by Night, he was gone. Not fired publicly, not credited differently, just quietly replaced. The official story was creative differences. The real story was far more complicated. Anthony Mann, a rising director with a gift for shadows and violence, had been brought in as an uncredited backup. At first, he just observed, offering suggestions, helping with lighting setups. But as production wore on, Mann started taking over more and more scenes. He relit entire sequences, changed camera angles, pushed for darker, more claustrophobic compositions. Worker resisted, then relented, then eventually just stopped showing up. The transition was so smooth that most of the cast didn't even notice. Mann never took credit. His name appears nowhere on the film, but if you know his work, you can see his fingerprints everywhere. The low angles, the deep shadows, the sense of urban entrapment, the way the city itself becomes a character, all Mann. He turned a standard police procedural into something more dangerous, more beautiful, more noir. Years later, Mann would become one of the greatest directors of westerns and crime films, but this was his secret training ground. He Walked by Night was the film where he learned to paint with darkness, and Hollywood never gave him a single credit for it. Number 4. Richard Basehart had been acting for years, mostly on stage, mostly in New York. He was talented, intense, but unknown to film audiences. When he auditioned for the role of Roy Morgan, the cold-blooded killer at the center of He Walked by Night, he didn't try to charm anyone. He didn't smile. He barely spoke. He just stared. That dead-eyed, emotionless stare that made the casting director uncomfortable. Most actors would have been sent home. Basehart got the part on the spot. But getting cast was just the beginning. To prepare, Basehart did something radical. He isolated himself completely. He moved into a cheap apartment alone, stopped socializing, stopped going out. He wanted to understand what it felt like to be Roy Morgan, a man who lived entirely in his own head, disconnected from humanity. For weeks, he barely spoke to anyone outside of the production. He'd show up to set, deliver his lines with chilling detachment, then disappear. The crew thought he was method before method acting had a name. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He was trying to vanish into a character who had already vanished from society. The performance was so unsettling that some theaters reported audience members leaving during his scenes. Not because they were bored, because they were disturbed. Basehart had created something rare in film noir. A villain with no charisma, no charm, no humanity. Just cold, brilliant, terrifying emptiness. And it worked because he lived it.
I know this money.
Number 5. The film needed the Los Angeles storm drain system. Not a set, not a studio recreation. The actual tunnels beneath the city. And the LAPD, for reasons that still seem insane, said yes. They opened up miles of active drainage tunnels and let a film crew crawl inside with cameras, lights, and actors. No safety inspectors, no permits from the city, just a handshake deal between the police and the studio. The conditions were beyond brutal. The tunnels were pitch black, filled with standing water, and smelled like death and chemicals. The temperature dropped 20 degrees below surface level. There was no ventilation, no emergency exits marked, no communication with the surface. If something went wrong, they were on their own. The crew rigged portable lights that barely penetrated the darkness. Shadows swallowed at everything. Cameraman John Alton, a master of noir lighting, nearly quit. He said shooting in the tunnels was like trying to light the inside of a coffin. But he stayed, and what he captured was unlike anything audiences had seen before. The tunnels weren't just a location. They became a living, breathing character in the film, a maze of concrete and darkness where the city's nightmares lived. When the final chase sequence hits the drains, it's not stage tension. It's real claustrophobia, real fear, real actors stumbling through real darkness. The studio saved money by using actual locations, but what they gained was something far more valuable: authenticity that no soundstage could ever fake. Number 6. John Alton wasn't just a cinematographer. He was a painter who happened to use cameras. Before He Walked by Night, he'd already established himself as one of the masters of film noir lighting. But this film pushed him further into darkness than he'd ever gone. Studio executives watched the dailies and panicked. They said the footage was too dark, that audiences wouldn't be able to see anything, that Alton was sabotaging the film. They demanded he add more light, brighten the scenes, make it look normal. Alton refused. He told them darkness was the point. The film was about a man who lived in shadows, who only came out at night, who disappeared into the urban landscape like smoke. If they wanted bright, clean images, they hired the wrong cinematographer. The executives threatened to replace him. Alton threatened to walk. Finally, producer Brian Foy stepped in and made a deal. Alton could shoot it as dark as he wanted, but they'd do test screenings. If audiences complained, he'd have to relight and reshoot. The screenings happened, not a single complaint. In fact, audiences praised the visual style, said it felt more real, more dangerous than typical Hollywood films. The darkness worked because it reflected the subject matter. Alton won the battle, and in doing so, he helped define what film noir could look like. Those deep shadows, the high contrast, the way light barely survives in the frame, that became the visual language of an entire genre. And it all started with a cinematographer who refused to turn on the lights. Number 7. The police radio communications throughout the film weren't recorded in a studio. They were actual LAPD radio transmissions, captured live during real police operations and woven into the film's soundtrack. The production team worked out a deal with the police department to monitor and record actual dispatch calls, patrol updates, and officer check-ins during their regular shifts. It was unprecedented access, the kind that would never be granted today due to privacy laws and security concerns. The recordings brought a documentary authenticity that scripted dialogue could never match. You can hear real tension in the voices, real procedure, real cops dealing with real situations. Some of the transmissions were from the actual Irwin Walker manhunt, pulled from archives and mixed into the soundtrack. When audiences heard those voices, flat, professional, devoid of Hollywood drama, it created a sense of reality that elevated the entire film. The technique was so effective that Jack Webb later adopted it for Dragnet, using real LAPD terminology and communication styles to ground his show in authenticity. But it started here, in a film that blurred the line between documentary and fiction so completely that audiences couldn't tell where reality ended and performance began. The police radio chatter wasn't decoration. It was proof that what they were watching had roots in something real, something dangerous, something that had actually happened in their city, and that made every frame more chilling.
All units in the vicinity of State Street, Santa Monica Boulevard.
Number 8. Most films build to a shootout. He Walked by Night built to a chase through hell. The final sequence, where police hunt Roy Morgan through the storm drains beneath Los Angeles, was supposed to take 3 days to film. It took 12. The tunnels were a nightmare to work in. Every piece of equipment had to be lowered through manholes. Lights kept shorting out from moisture. The sound was impossible. Every footstep echoed endlessly. Every word bounced off concrete until it became gibberish. They had to record most of the dialogue later in post-production. The actors were miserable. Richard Basehart spent hours wading through water that was probably contaminated, breathing air that smelled like sewage and rot. The stunt team kept getting lost in the tunnels because they all looked identical. One crew member actually got separated from the group and spent 2 hours wandering in the dark before finding his way back. LAPD officers on set as advisors admitted they'd never spent this much time in the drains, that it was genuinely dangerous, and they were surprised the city allowed it. But the danger translated directly to the screen. When you watch that final chase, you can feel the walls closing in, feel the panic, the disorientation, the primal fear of being hunted underground. It's not movie magic. It's real people in real darkness, and the camera captured every terrifying second. Modern films would have built a set, controlled every variable, kept everyone safe. He Walked by Night just threw everyone into the pit and filmed what happened. Number 9. The script was lean, stripped down, almost skeletal. Only 79 minutes of runtime, with minimal dialogue and maximum tension. The writers, John C. Higgins and Crane Wilbur, based their screenplay directly on police reports, court documents, and interviews with the detectives who had worked the Irwin Walker case. They didn't add romance, didn't give the killer a sympathetic backstory, didn't Hollywoodize it with unnecessary subplots. What they created was something closer to a police training film than a traditional narrative feature. The structure followed the actual investigation step by step. The crime, the evidence gathering, the analysis, the manhunt, the capture. No wasted motion, no filler, just procedure and pursuit. Some studio executives complained that it was too cold, too mechanical, that audiences needed someone to root for or care about. But the writers held firm. They argued that the city was the protagonist, the LAPD was the hero, and the procedural method was the story. Individual personalities mattered less than the system. This approach was radical for 1948, when most crime films centered on charismatic detectives or tortured criminals. He Walked by Night centered on methodology, on the grinding, unglamorous work of police investigation. And somehow, it worked. Audiences were riveted because they'd never seen crime solved this way on screen before. No hunches, no lucky breaks, just evidence, analysis, and relentless pursuit. The lean script forced everything else to work harder. The visuals, the performances, the atmosphere. Nothing was there to distract from the hunt, and that made it unforgettable. Number 10. The technical equipment throughout the film wasn't props. It was actual LAPD forensic equipment, on loan from the police department's crime lab. Fingerprint analysis machines, photography equipment, evidence processing tools, all the real gear that detectives used every day. The production hired actual police technicians to operate the equipment on camera, showing real procedures, real techniques, real methods. When you see fingerprints being analyzed or photographs being developed, those aren't actors pretending. Those are trained forensic specialists doing their actual jobs while cameras rolled. This level of authenticity was insane for a Hollywood production. Most films would have built fake equipment, had actors mime the procedures, and moved on. But He Walked by Night wanted every detail to be correct, because the story demanded it. The film wasn't just entertainment. It was also a showcase for modern police methods, a way to demonstrate to the public how science and technology had transformed law enforcement. The LAPD was happy to participate because it made them look professional, capable, cutting edge. The film became recruitment propaganda, whether intentionally or not. Young men watched it and wanted to become detectives. Police departments across the country started adopting the techniques shown in the film. And all of it stemmed from a decision to use real equipment, real procedures, real expertise. Fake it, and you're just making a movie. Make it real, and you're making history.
State Street, Santa Monica Boulevard. Proceeded once to 5057 State Street. 5057 State Street.
Number 11. Roy Morgan's apartment in the film was dressed with real stolen electronics, actual police evidence from burglaries that hadn't been claimed yet. The LAPD brought boxes of confiscated radios, televisions, and technical equipment to the set and let the production use them as props. Some of it was evidence from the actual Irwin Walker case, items he'd stolen during his crime spree. When Richard Basehart worked in those scenes, surrounded by piles of modified radios and electronic components, he was literally standing in the middle of a real criminal's workspace. The set decorator barely had to do anything. They just arranged the evidence and started filming. But this created a bizarre legal situation. Technically, some of that equipment was still tied to open cases, still had evidentiary value, and probably shouldn't have been removed from the police property room. Nobody seemed to care. The LAPD was so invested in the film, so eager to show their methods and celebrate their victory over Irwin Walker, that they bent every rule to help production. The studio got authentic props that no set decorator could have fabricated convincingly. The police got publicity and prestige, and somewhere, crime victims probably wondered why their stolen property was appearing in a movie instead of being returned to them. It was a strange collaboration, one that could only have happened in the late 1940s, before liability concerns and chain of custody protocols locked everything down. The result on screen is undeniable. Morgan's apartment feels lived in, cluttered with the obsessive accumulation of a real criminal mind, because in many ways, it was. Number 12. The film's trailer didn't exist for weeks after the studio demanded one. The marketing department watched the rough cut and had no idea how to sell it. It wasn't a traditional crime thriller with a clear hero. It wasn't a romantic noir with a femme fatale. It was cold, procedural, almost clinical in its approach to crime and punishment. The first trailer they cut made it look like a documentary, which terrified the studio. They went back, tried again, this time emphasizing action and the sewer chase. Better, but still not quite right. Finally, they landed on a unique approach. Sell it as a true story, emphasize the authenticity, make the LAPD cooperation the hook. The tagline became, "The City of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Police Department present," as if the film was an official document rather than entertainment. It worked. Audiences came because they wanted to see real police methods, real locations, real procedures. The trailer promised truth, and the film delivered it. But it took nearly a month of editing and re-editing to figure out how to market something that didn't fit any existing category. The film was creating its own genre in real time, and nobody quite knew what to call it yet. Number 13. Halfway through production, Richard Basehart collapsed on set. Not from exhaustion, though he was exhausted. Not from the physical demands, though crawling through storm drains had taken their toll. He collapsed from the weight of the character. Playing Roy Morgan, inhabiting that isolated sociopathic headspace for weeks, had started to affect him psychologically. He told the production doctor he was having trouble sleeping, trouble separating himself from the role when cameras stopped. The isolation he'd imposed on himself as preparation had worked too well. He disconnected from normal human interaction, and now he couldn't reconnect. The studio gave him 2 days off, urged him to socialize, to break character, to remember he was an actor playing a role. Basehart tried, but he said the character wouldn't leave. He'd created something inside himself that had taken on a life of its own. When he returned to set, he was functional, but changed. The crew noticed it. His performance got even colder, even more detached. Some of the final scenes, particularly in the storm drains, have a quality that's hard to define. Not acting exactly, something rawer, more disturbed. Basehart later said, "He Walked by Night was the hardest role he ever played, not because of the physical demands, but because of what it required him to become internally. Method acting before it had a name, and it nearly broke him." Number 14. The score was composed by Leonid Massine, but most people remember the film for its lack of music. Long stretches play in complete silence, broken only by footsteps, radio chatter, and ambient city noise. This was intentional, but it caused massive fights in post-production. The studio wanted a traditional noir score, brooding strings, dramatic swells during the chase sequences. Massine composed one. Then the director and editor watched the rough cut with the music and hated it. They felt it made the film too Hollywood, too manufactured. They started pulling music out, leaving scenes naked, exposed. The studio panicked. They said audiences would be uncomfortable with silence, that it felt unfinished, amateur. But preview screenings proved them wrong. Audiences responded to the silence with heightened tension. Without music to tell them how to feel, they had to engage more actively with what was happening on screen. The silence made everything more real, more documentary-like. So they compromised. Music stays in the opening and closing, establishing and releasing tension. But the middle, the investigation, the hunt, plays almost entirely without score. It was a radical choice in 1948, and it influenced decades of crime films that followed. Silence became a tool, not a gap to be filled. Number 15. The film premiered in February 1949 to modest box office and strong reviews. Critics praised its realism, its visual style, its unflinching portrayal of police work. But the real impact came later, in police academies and film schools. He Walked by Night became required viewing for law enforcement training programs across the country. Departments used it to show proper evidence handling, crime scene photography, and investigative procedure. For years, it was screened alongside actual training films because the line between fiction and documentary was so blurred. Film students studied it for John Alton's cinematography, for Anthony Mann's directorial techniques, for its influence on the noir movement. It became one of those rare films that mattered more over time, that grew in reputation and influence long after its initial release. The modest B-movie that studios barely marketed became a touchstone, a film that other films measured themselves against. Jack Webb watched it obsessively while developing Dragnet. Countless police procedurals on television and film borrowed its template. The modern crime drama, with its focus on forensics and methodology, traces its lineage directly back to this film. Nobody involved knew they were creating something that would echo through 75 years of entertainment history. They were just trying to make a good picture on a tight budget with full cooperation from the LAPD. Number 16. During the storm drain sequences, the production lost equipment, expensive equipment, a camera, lights, tools, all swallowed by the tunnels and never recovered. The drainage system beneath Los Angeles is massive, hundreds of miles of interconnected passages, and the crew was working in sections that hadn't been fully mapped. Someone set down a camera case, turned around, and it was gone, swept away by water flow, fallen into a side channel, simply vanished into the darkness. They searched for hours, couldn't find it. Insurance covered the loss, but it created a strange piece of movie history. Somewhere in the Los Angeles storm drains, there's still equipment from He Walked by Night, buried in sediment or rusted beyond recognition. An artifact from film history lost in the exact location where it was used. Crew members joked about it, said the tunnels claimed a sacrifice for letting them film there. But there was also genuine unease. The drains felt wrong, ancient, hostile. Several crew members reported getting disoriented, feeling watched, experiencing genuine fear that had nothing to do with the film's plot. The lost equipment became part of the lore, proof that they'd pushed into spaces that didn't want them there. And yet, they kept filming, kept descending into those concrete tunnels, kept capturing something raw and real that no studio set could ever replicate. Number 17. Richard Basehart never watched the finished film. After production wrapped, after he'd finally emerged from the character of Roy Morgan, he told friends he never wanted to see it. The experience had been too intense, too psychologically demanding. Going back and watching himself inhabit that character felt like reopening a wound that had barely healed. The studio invited him to the premiere. He didn't attend. They sent him a print. He never screened it. Years later, after he'd become a successful actor with dozens of films to his credit, interviewers would ask about He Walked by Night. He'd talk about the production, about the storm drains, about John Alton's lighting. But he'd never discuss the performance, never analyze what he'd done as Roy Morgan. It was as if that part of his life existed in a locked room he refused to enter. Some actors treasure their breakthrough roles, watch them repeatedly, celebrate the work. Basehart treated his like evidence from a crime scene, something to be documented and filed away but never revisited. In a strange way, that made the performance even more powerful. He'd given something of himself to create Roy Morgan, something he couldn't get back, and the film preserved it forever. Whether he watched or not, it existed. A document of an actor who disappeared so completely into a role that he couldn't find his way back. Number 18. The Dragnet connection runs deeper than most people know. Jack Webb didn't just absorb the style and procedure from He Walked by Night. He hired the same technical advisors, used the same LAPD contacts, and modeled his entire production philosophy on what he'd observed during filming. When he created Dragnet, first as a radio show in 1949, then as television's first major police procedural in 1951, he brought in several people who had worked on He Walked by Night as consultants. The just the facts narration, the focus on case numbers and evidence processing, the unglamorous portrayal of detective work, all of it came directly from this film. Webb even tried to hire Richard Basehart for Dragnet before settling on his own starring role. The show's visual style, particularly in its television incarnation, mimicked John Alton's high-contrast cinematography, dark shadows, stark lighting, urban landscapes shot at night. It was He Walked by Night, stretched across hundreds of episodes. The film's DNA replicated and spread throughout American popular culture. And the LAPD loved it. Dragnet became the most successful recruitment tool the department ever had, bringing in thousands of applicants who wanted to be just like Joe Friday. All of it traced back to a B-movie that barely made money on its initial release, but created a template that television would mine for decades. Number 19. Years after release, the film became evidence in a trial. In 1952, a burglar was caught in Los Angeles using techniques nearly identical to Roy Morgan's methods. He'd modified police radios to monitor law enforcement, committed crimes at night in commercial districts, and attempted to escape through the storm drain system. During his trial, prosecutors introduced He Walked by Night as evidence, arguing that the defendant had studied the film to learn criminal techniques. The defense objected, saying it was absurd to blame a movie for their client's crimes. The judge allowed limited reference to the film, but warned the jury not to consider it as direct evidence of premeditation. The case raised uncomfortable questions. Had the film, in its quest for authenticity, created an instructional manual for criminals? The LAPD, which had cooperated so fully with production, suddenly wondered if they'd made a mistake. Other police departments reported similar cases, criminals using methods depicted in the film. It created a chilling feedback loop. Real crime inspired the film inspired new crimes. The studio never commented publicly, but internally there were discussions about responsibility, about how realistic was too realistic. In the end, nothing changed. The film remained in distribution, continued to influence filmmakers and apparently some criminals, but it served as an early warning about the power of authentic depiction, about how teaching audiences real procedures could have unintended consequences. Number 20. The film's stock itself became a preservation crisis. He Walked by Night was shot on nitrate film, the standard for the era, but also highly unstable and flammable. By the 1970s, the original negative was deteriorating rapidly. A preservation effort began, but large sections had already degraded beyond recovery. Some scenes exist only in lower quality prints, missing the full depth of John Alton's cinematography. The storm drain sequences suffered the most, ironic given how hard they were to film. The dampness of the tunnels had affected the film stock during production. And decades later, that damage compounded. Preservationists did their best, creating new masters from the best available materials, but acknowledged that we'll never see the film exactly as audiences did in 1949. Some of that legendary darkness, those deep shadows that defined the noir aesthetic, are partially lost to time. What remains is still powerful, still influential, still important. But somewhere in the gap between what was captured and what survived, a piece of film history dissolved like silver nitrate in solution. It's a reminder that film preservation isn't just academic concern. It's a race against chemistry, against time, against the fundamental instability of the medium itself. The bonus fact: the sewers beneath Los Angeles still echo with the film's legacy. Urban explorers who navigate the storm drain system illegally often reference He Walked by Night, using it as a map for navigation. The tunnels look essentially the same as they did in 1948, concrete and darkness and water. Occasionally, someone will post photos online from deep in the drainage system, standing in the exact spots where Richard Basehart stood, where the cameras captured those final chase scenes. The city doesn't officially condone drain exploration, but the film created an enduring fascination with the tunnels. Tour companies offer legal, limited access to certain sections, marketing them as film noir locations. The LAPD still uses portions of the tunnel system for training exercises, teaching officers how to navigate confined spaces and conduct urban pursuits. And sometimes, during those training sessions, someone will mention the film. We'll talk about how it all started here, in these same tunnels, when a movie crew descended into darkness and captured something that refuses to fade. He Walked by Night didn't just document the sewers. It transformed them into mythology, into cinema history, into a location that will forever be associated with shadows, pursuit, and the moment film noir discovered its deepest, darkest potential. The tunnels remember, even if the film stock doesn't.